In the aftermath of the Great Depression, massive unemployment, and widespread destitution, William Beveridge created welfare provisions which were designed to be a safety net to catch the most vulnerable. The welfare state and the National Health Service were flagships of a more compassionate society. In the aftermath of COVID-19, when we examine our response to the elderly and the vulnerable, there must be some real soul-searching about the successes and the failings, about social solidarity and inequality, supply chains and national resilience and capacity, over-reliance on dictatorships like China, the nature of pandemics, and the role of science and international collaboration in the making and shaping of public policy. In responding, it will be natural to want to look after those always who are closest to us, our families and our local community. And in this horrible pandemic, I naturally worry for a son who's an A&E doctor in Liverpool, working in the NHS on the front line. I'm anxious about isolated friends, fear for disabled people and vulnerable people. I'm horrified by accounts from friends in Italy and Spain and New York, and deeply shocked as we learn of the attrition within our care homes and watch workmen assembling makeshift morgues in English cities and provide cold storage for corpses while churches are locked up. But even worse than all this, how would you begin to cope if, even before the arrival of COVID-19, you were part of a persecuted and despised minority living on the margins of society? Nearly 50 years ago, as a newly elected Liverpool City Councillor, I said that charity and compassion may begin at home, but it doesn't and mustn't end there. What applies to our individual charity should apply to our public policy too, especially to those living in the shadow 50 years later of COVID-19, living without safety nets. Lives of utter despair and destitution are the hallmarks of their existence. Drill down into the relentless tsunami of news reports about COVID-19, and you'll see occasional references to beleaguered communities in faraway places, people with no recourse to the British National Health Service, to hand washing, to personal sanitizers, or to self-isolation. I've heard this week from friends in Pakistan, many of whom are forced to live in apartheid-style, caste-based shanty towns called colonies, which I visited. They have dirt floors, little clean water, no electricity, filthy latrines, and people living on top of one another. Disfigured prejudice and social and religious discrimination create a toxic cocktail, throwing coronavirus into this situation, and it's a catastrophe. Cleaning latrines and cleaning streets are among the menial jobs specifically reserved for the Christian minority by Pakistan's provincial governments. 80 to 90% of sanitation workers are Christians. They're not even issued with clothing or gloves. A high-ranking official recently told me when I raised this with him that it was a sign of their respect for Christians that they're allowed to clean latrines and the homes of the majority. Consider too that 25 Christian prisoners are languishing in Pakistan's fated, malodorous jails, 6 of whom are awaiting execution for the so-called crime of blasphemy. Spare a special thought for Shagusta Khalsa and her disabled husband, Emmanuel, sentenced to death in 2014 for allegedly sending blasphemous text messages in English, a language which neither of them can speak, on phones that they didn't even own. Both will be at great risk now of coronavirus. I've written to Imran Khan asking for clemency. During Ramadan, this would be a sign of mercy and compassion. Instead of which, let me tell you about a man called Salam Massi. He was 22 years of age and a farm labourer. He died at the end of February, having been tortured by a cattle farm owner for washing in water from that man's well in Punjab's Baghiana. Salim was accused of polluting the well because he came from a minority religion, so they tortured him with heated iron rods, and they killed him. Yes, we're all grappling with grief, but imagine that you were Salim's mother or father, or the parent of Humas Yanuna. She was a 14-year-old Pakistani girl who was reportedly kidnapped, raped, forced to marry, and to convert. Or imagine that you are a Rohingya Muslim, escaping from Burma and being refused admission to Malaysia and being sent back to sea on rafts and small boats and seeing your loved ones drown en route. Or that you are a Uyghur Muslim, incarcerated along with a million others by the Chinese Communist Party in detention centers in Xinjiang the perfect breeding ground for COVID-19. The coronavirus doesn't discriminate, but persecutors still do. The virus doesn't know whether you are a Christian, a Muslim, or an atheist, but your persecutor does. Like the virus, persecution comes under the cloak of darkness. Just before Christmas, I visited refugee camps in northern Iraq, where Daesh persecution became outright genocide. Globally, more than 70 million people have been forced by persecution, conflict, violence, and human rights violations to flee their homes. At the Badr Ash refugee camp, which I visited in northern Iraq, people had fled Turkish aerial bombardment. These camps, overcrowded, with lack of sanitation, limited health care or vaccination programs, are a perfect breeding ground in which the coronavirus can flourish. Even in less challenging times, refugees are out of sight and out of mind, not included in planning for pandemics or natural disasters. Living under canvas and cooking in open fires, Bangladesh's refugees are already compromised as they queued up for rations, handouts, and medical help. Gladly, they would have swapped places with British shoppers, cross that supermarkets are limiting to what they can buy or insisting on social distancing. In countries like Iraq and Syria, where already overstretched public health systems are weak or have been broken by endless conflict and ensuing chaos, in dismal refugee camps and along porous borders, what chance have the authorities got of halting the transmission of COVID-19? A shocking situation becomes catastrophic when religious or secular leaders inflame hatred against despised, stigmatized, fleeing refugees. Countries like Turkey and Pakistan all too often allow people to whip up hatred of minorities with little or no sympathy for those fleeing persecution. Excluded from any support mechanisms, COVID-19 lockdown denies them jobs, income, or food for their families. No business interruption scheme, no furloughing, no job retention scheme for them. And under the cover of coronavirus, militant Islamist radicals add to the number of refugees. Boko Haram continues their depredations in Nigeria. ISIS regroups in northern Iraq. Hamas terrorizes the few remaining Christians in Gaza. And Somalia's al-Shabaab drives Christians out of northern Kenya. How easily we forget that just 5 years ago, on the eve of Good Friday, 143 students were killed at Kenya's Garissa University, singled out and executed because of their Christian beliefs. No wonder we hear the ancient cry, "How long, O Lord, how long?" and ask, where is God in all of this? Mercifully, organizations like Aid to the Church in Need and Christian Solidarity Worldwide are trying to answer that question through their practical actions. But Jonathan Sacks, the former Jewish chief rabbi, was once asked how, in the light of the horrors of Auschwitz, he could believe in God. He responded, "Don't ask where was God at Auschwitz, ask where was man." Jews and Christians have just celebrated Passover and Easter. Muslims have just embarked on Ramadan. Whatever our faith or lack of it, this is a moment to ask that same question, to put the genius and resources of mankind at the service of our common humanity, to renew our commitment to those without safety nets, to those living under the shadow of darkness, knowing that compassion and charity may begin at home, but they should never end.